Hello, World Singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back, everyone. We are here with Part 4, Epigraphs, and our breakdown.
Part 4, Epigraphs.
We have so far been reviewing all of the different epigraphs. You can go back, you can find it, you can comment on it and let us know what you think about the epigraphs. We're everywhere, Twitter, Facebook.
We got YouTube, we got Patreon, we got an email address.
Find us everywhere. Let us know your thoughts, because the epigraphs from Part 4 are one of the more confusing, and I think because Part 4 is like the beginning of the Sanders Avalanche, you can kind of get lost with the epigraphs. They don't necessarily make a lot of sense until you have the bigger picture of the whole story, and that is always like the most fascinating ones. Those are the ones that we need to return to.
Yeah, they are very interesting. Part 4 epigraphs are excerpts from Kalak's journal, the Herald Kalak, who we see quite a bit of in this book. Super interesting.
Yeah, the Heralds went from being like, can you spot them? Where's Waldo type of situation in Stormlight Archive to now we have epigraphs written by them. We have them talking and interacting with our main characters. We have them as key plot points.
Well, and we know that the second half of the Stormlight Archive, 6 through 10, is going to be focused on the Heralds.
And who the heck knows?
Who knows what that means?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be a replacement of Heralds. Maybe some Heralds stand up and like re-achieve their greatness, and some need to be like, we got to get this dude out of here. They cray.
It will be very interesting. For the moment, let's do a little bit of just like background reminders about Kalak. And Kalak is his OG original name. He is one of, I think, 3 heralds whose original names were already symmetrical, and then due to a linguistic vowel shift that happened in the language somewhere over the course of the last thousands of years, his name currently in Vorinism is Kalak. So either one is correct, whatever floats your boat, if you like the A or the E, but always make sure it's symmetrical, of course. Be a good Vorin.
Got to.
Kalak is known as the patron of the Order of Willshapers, so Venli's order. Interesting.
We also know him by many other names, like most of our characters. They have more than one name, but Shallan is tasked with hunting down a man named Ristares. How would you say that?
I say it Ristaris, but
good.
I know in the audiobooks they say something different. I think it's Ristares.
So let's go with Ristares here, and we can let the audiobook do its audiobook things. Now, we will come to learn, obviously, that Kalak is Ristares, but Shallan doesn't know that for a long time going into it. Kalak is, though, the historical head organizer. I don't know how much organizing he's doing nowadays, but he was the inspiration and original head of the Sons of Honor.
Yeah, and we actually hear the name Ristaris way back in, like, Words of Radiance, I think. Amaram mentions Ristaris, again, in conjunction with the Sons of Honor, and, like, reporting to him or something like that. So at least as recently as Words of Radiance, he's somehow involved in the Sons of Honor.
But he has a problem, magical malady, as it has been,
of course,
nicknamed. But all of our heralds are in a weakened position because of their years of physical and psychological torture. For Brandon has said in A Word of Brandon that he wants these things that the heralds are dealing with to specifically be magical, unlike post-traumatic stress disorder or alcoholism or any of the other things that his main human characters are dealing with. The heralds are specifically dealing with something that is magical, and I feel like it would make him a not great head of any type of organization. So maybe that explains the end of the Sons of Honor, because what's he dealing with?
His magical malady is that he is pathologically incapable of making decisions, and he also seems to have really intense anxiety, particularly when he is around other humans. But we see in Rhythm of War a really extreme version of this. Like when a lot of commotion starts happening, he completely breaks down, can't handle it, like curls into a tiny ball. But even if we go all the way back to the prologue of Way of Kings, when he's like, walking around the palace and stuff, he always kind of has that really nervous, anxious,
jittery
energy. Almost. Yeah, absolutely. Like he's a little bit agoraphobic, doesn't really like being around humans or in large spaces. He really just wants to like be alone and by himself.
And because of this, he has sought refuge at Lasting Integrity, the home of the Honor Spren inside the cognitive realm. So literally on Roshar, because he's bound there, and that's another problem he has, but on Roshar, he's getting as far away as possible from humans, into the cognitive realm, and then to the home of the Honor Spren, who now no longer like humans. Like the least likely place that he's going to run into big crowds. And of course, that's where our characters hunt him down to.
Yeah, Kalak, gosh, I just find his character so interesting. It's interesting in that, and we've talked in the past about how all of the Herald's magical maladies seem to be like an inversion of like something they're known for, or their defining characteristic has been inverted.
Yeah, the name of his order, the Willshapers, to shape the will of others. You have to be capable of shaping the will of yourself.
And one of in Vorinism, one of his like divine attributes that's associated with him is resolute, meaning like you are determined and unwavering, and like you're, steadfast, which is the opposite of what Kalak is now.
He is manifesting all of these both personal failings, collective failings, and now the magical maladies in a very fatalistic and pessimistic mindset. He basically thinks that the war for Roshar is over, and he wants to just get away, literally to leave the system. And that is one of the reasons that he's gone out of his way to like create the Sons of Honor, or to be directing the Sons of Honor. Is I think he's hoping that someone can find a way that would allow him to leave the Rosharian system. Of course, that's exactly the opposite of what Thydakar wants. He wants to get into the system, but in the same way to leave his own.
His own system.
So very
what
linked.
I think is really interesting is like, I think in Kalak we can really see the guilt of what the Heralds did. I totally forgot that Kalak is the first herald that we see in Way of Kings coming off of the battlefield. He's like the last one to leave the battlefield and go back to the meeting place where all the swords are stuck in the dirt. So like he kind of has the opportunity at that point, right, to say, wait. What are you talking about? How did you guys decide this? No, we can't do this. He wasn't a part of the group deciding. So he kind of had this external judge like role there.
Yeah, stamp of approval was basically given to him.
Kind of.
And he did the stamping and now maybe has to deal with the ramifications.
Yeah, he was like the last piece of the puzzle that gave his stamp of approval and said, okay, let's do this. And so I think that he, in a way, like uniquely feels guilty for that. And that is like the seed of why he is so pessimistic about humanity, because the heralds were supposed to be the best of humanity that were elevated to this position, and obviously they failed. And so in his mind, like, if the best of us couldn't even, be good, then there's no hope for any other humans.
Yeah, but you just gotta keep trying, Kalak. Like, he forgot to watch The Good Place after his
He has
years of
certainly
torture.
forgotten his ideals, because at this point he's like death before life.
He's like, escape first. If that's not possible, death.
Yeah,
Death.
which is also interesting, because you would think, like, if he was feeling so guilty about the fact that he abandoned humanity the first time, that, like, maybe he wouldn't be trying to abandon the whole system now. But I feel like he's really just thrown in the towel.
I think that does have to play into the concept of the magical malady, though, where his greatest failure is then being like relived and re-experienced now in everything, where he can't make any type of decision because the last time he made a major decision, it was,
it was not a great one. So he like doesn't trust his judgment anymore.
Exactly. And so it's like it's eating away at him in exactly the right type of way to make him as weak as possible. And of course, if we are to assume that the magical malady is so defined by Brandon for a specific reason, it may be because it is like something that is being done to them in a way by their torturers.
I mean, I think that there is like a really, really specific thing that's happening with these magical maladies that is causing, like I said, the sort of defining characteristic of the Herald to be flipped or corrupted in some way, so that it really is like that specific thing, and there's something targeting that specific thing.
Yeah, it's almost like the years and years and decades, centuries, millennia of torture. You could imagine that at a certain point, the torturers would get a little bored of their work and would maybe like offload that to some cool fabrial that they developed. And it was just like always attacking. It was like always on pressure. I don't actually think there's a torture fabrial, but it does seem like there's a specific thing.
Specifically related to torture. Like, yes, they were tortured, but I think their magical maladies are related to something else.
Yeah, I know I've seen a couple of people theorizing that like their power in part is tied up to their nature as like a cognitive shadow, a type 2 invested entity. And so perhaps by, only kind of having a avenue or one or two avenues to like express your power, then it can easily just be rebounded back onto you. So it's basically like their own power is being directed back at them. And you could definitely imagine like some type of, instead of a fabrial torture device, it's just like we held up a mirror to your power. Maybe that comes in the form of like anti-void light or something like that. But just, I know other people have been theorizing about the why these specific injuries for our heralds at this time.
And the cool thing about Kalak's journal is that it does sort of shed some light on what it is to be a cognitive shadow and like what it is to be a herald now.
So let's talk about the journal specifically. We believe that it was maybe written during Adolin's trial or shortly thereafter Adolin's trial.
It kind of seems like it.
There are scenes when Adolin is like looking over at Kalak to like check on him, and he's just kind of scribbling away often. And so I think that could be it. The timeline might get a little fuzzy. Some parts of it may be written then, maybe a little bit after, because he dumps a lot of both Cosmere knowledge, but also like personal reflections and thoughts. And so we're going to go into this by picking out many of our favorite and most important quotes and then talking about them. We're not going to do a straight read through this time. So let's start us off with his own beginning quote, which is so sad and just like sets the tone of, oh, this is a bummer one. He says, quote, "I am a barren tree of a human being. I am the hollow that once was a mighty peak," end quote. So if that wasn't enough to bring it down, let's just remind ourselves that we've heard things like this in the Cosmere before, specifically with our kind of weird quasi-cognitive shadow characters, where they've been through so much that they have basically lost the connection to what they once were.
Yeah, I think the next part of this, to me, like really paints a picture of what it's like to be a cognitive shadow. Quote, "I am a blur, a smear on the page, a gaunt stretch of ink, made all the more insubstantial with each passing day." End quote. And I think that this also kind of illustrates what happens with the honor spren and Shallan at Lasting Integrity, where she's like asking around about any humans that might be there, and they specifically don't tell her about Kalak. And their like justification for this, when she confronts them and she's like, "You lied to me, you didn't tell me." They're like, "Well, he's not really a human, he's really more of a spren, so you know, that makes it okay." And I think this is just like a good backup of that justification of like, he really isn't human anymore.
And we have talked about this a bunch, obviously, with our characters like Vasher, Thydakar, Kelsier, and we mentioned multiple times that the Heralds are the Risharian version of the return that we see on Nalthis, and that there are probably,
Do we know that for sure?
Well, we know that the Heralds have been compared to Vasher, and Vasher is a return.
I guess that's true.
So I was just doing like a transitive property leap. The way that I think of it is there are probably only a couple of ways of pulling off this trick based on the limits of the cognitive, physical, and spiritual realms. And Endowment on her planet figured out the method of return, and Honor, Cultivation, Odium figured out this method of creating the Heralds. I believe that there's a very close tie. Vasher calls himself a Type 2 invested entity. We would assume that that is also what the Heralds are like or similar to. Mm-hmm. And all of this is just backing it up. His own words, the words of the Honor Spren, everything that we know kind of seems to be backing up. The Heralds are like returned, kept alive for way too long, kept around.
With their memories.
Yes. And Kalak specifically talks about that in the next couple of sentences. But first, he mentions Yezerin and gives us some key tidbits from that like thing that was hanging up there after Moash kills him in the last book. So, quote, "The singers first put Yezerin into a gemstone. They think they are clever, discovering they can trap us in those. It only took them 7,000 years." End quote. Now we know that Moash, with that knife, captured Yezerin, killed, and all the different heralds felt that simultaneously.
Yeah, I think it's great that this quote specifically says they put Yezerin into a gemstone, because if you just read that the first time in Oathbringer, like, maybe you get that, but, you're kind of shocked by the fact that Yezerin was just killed. Yeah. And, like, what you see is him being stabbed with a dagger. So, there's something that's kind of like, well, it's just a magical dagger and now he's dead. So I really like that this specifically says, and now from all of the science that we see in Rhythm of War, we know exactly what happened. The metal conducted his investiture / spirit into the gemstone in the hilt of the dagger.
We also know that this is the goal of Mraize / Thydakar, and the goal that they task Shallan with accomplishing is to do the same thing to Kalak. And he references that and recognizes that his end is coming. Once they killed Yezerin, he realized like, oh, the secret is out. Eventually you'll be coming for me too. And this is basically his, not suicide note, but like his last will and testament.
Kind of, yeah.
He knows he's going out and he can't fight it in any way. And probably suspects that all of this craziness going on around him is like part of the danger or risk.
This is another piece of evidence, too, for how the heralds are closer to being Spren than human, because as we know, Spren, like Ba'ada Mishram and the Thrill, can be captured inside of a gemstone.
Yes, and probably his last lines of this letter doubly reinforce that, which we will get to. But all of the Spren cognitive shadows, type 2 invested entities, all seem to be able to be captured in some way, be contained depending on the gemstone.
Theoretically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like a interesting aspect of the Stormlight Archive that is like underlying, this is the whole point. This is what the whole story is about, is like, what is the relationship between all of these things? And then Brandon is basically introducing these concepts of like, if you can capture these things with a gemstone, how can that gemstone be used? What does it mean to be capturing something's soul? If that thing is big or small or powerful or not powerful, it's like all there.
Yeah, and then in the case of the heralds, it is slightly different, as Kalak goes on to say. We'll just skip a little bit to stay in the same theme here. Quote, "Yes, die. If you're reading this and wondering what went wrong, why my soul evaporated soon after being claimed by the gemstone and your knife, then I name you idiot for playing with powers you only presume to understand. Capture one of us with your knives, and you won't be left with a spren in a jar, foolish ones. You'll be left with a being that eventually fades away into the beyond." End quote.
Now we know the beyond is something that Kelsier in Mistborn Secret History has dealt with and had conversations with Preservation, like, what is this? And where are the characters that he sees, including Vin and Ellen, even the Lord Ruler, all choose to go to the beyond? That's the thing that seems to exist like after the Cosmere.
Yeah, it's the spiritual realm.
Yes, and just like completely, reabsorbed back into the universe, all energy existing as one type of thing. But the concept that we see here introduced by Kalak is that the heralds are not going to stay inside of a gemstone for long because they are connected. Capital C connection.
Oh, do you think that's why?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Without the connection, as this next line says, quote, "The bond is what keeps us alive. You sever that and we will slowly decompose into ordinary souls." End quote. So my concept and my reading of this is that the thing that was done to the heralds in the Oathpact and forming that capital C connection is actually what is keeping them around. And that is why the torture swings on, if one of them break, all of them break.
Right.
Because they are all one thing. And so
yeah,
I see this as Yezerin is like a finger that get chopped off the hole, and the hole is relatively fine. It feels the pain, but like the finger's not going to grow into something else or not going to be something else. It is just the scraps, the leftover. And that is what Yezrin's body is going to return to and does return to. And this, so it's like his physical realm fades, the magical connection that was tying. So he just goes back to a regular cognitive shadow and loses all type of power or influence and then goes to the beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think even more than that, like, I wonder if he would even be a cognitive shadow anymore once isolated from the Oathpact, or if he, like it says here, just goes back to being an ordinary soul that then just goes to the beyond like it normally would.
I guess you have that question and that difference between Scadrial, where everyone seemed to approach Fuzz. He said that was like one of his duties, was to talk to everyone as they transitioned. And so maybe on Rashar, it doesn't quite work that way, where everyone is like, quote unquote, a cognitive shadow who like stops in the cognitive realm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
the,
that's the question, is like, what exactly is a cognitive shadow?
These are the deep things. But I think that just the concept of like his cognitive shadow, all of the Herald's cognitive shadows were stapled back onto a physical body.
Because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the like actual description of a cognitive shadow from Brandon specifically has to do with a soul being steeped in investiture. So if it's just like literally a plain old soul, it's not automatically a cognitive shadow, it's just a soul. If like at the end of Rhythm of War, when Eshonai dies, she dies invested specifically. And so she's able to persist for some amount of time after her death. She does eventually go to the beyond. But I think it has to be that kind of thing where you are somewhat heavily invested at the time of your death in order to even become a cognitive shadow.
I think that you're right. And it's just like we're like kind of splitting hairs because we're talking about different planets. Because I think
but I think that's what I'm saying. I think it is consistent across. I don't think any soul who dies on Scadrial is automatically a cognitive shadow until they go to the beyond. I think they're just a soul.
But those souls all stop in the cognitive realm to talk to Fuzz.
Yeah, for like 1 sec to be like, hey man,
exactly.
Thanks, peace.
So that's what I'm saying is like everyone has a cognitive shadow because that is what makes you part of each of the realms.
I disagree, but that's not what this episode is about.
It's a fun disagreement though, because I think this is like the key part is we're trying to discuss and figure out what exactly is the difference between Heralds, Spren, Returned, Radiance, Dead Blades, Spren Blades, like all of these things are connected, and the way that it's unfolding, I think the debate is important basically, because I think that's what Brandon wants us to do, because he's like feeding us these little bits piece by piece.
Then from what we know in this book, at least from what we hear from Vasher, Spren are a type 1 invested entity because they are literally only pieces of investiture that have gained sentience. They are pure investiture. So the difference between them and a cognitive shadow is that a cognitive shadow is investiture inside of a soul.
But it is so I think what we are like differencing on here is just the difference between a soul and whatever pieces of the cognitive realm are necessary to make up a soul, and a cognitive shadow specifically, because what you mentioned about Eshonai is really the key. Eshonai is an example of something that's unusual, that does not happen with everyone's death. She's like surprising the Stormfather a little bit when he's like, oh, you died heavily invested. I will give you this one last chance to like go explore and check out Al Rashar, and she soars above, and that's like her end, and then she fades. That is not normal at all. I think on Scadrial specifically, because everything was made by preservation and ruin, and there's that weird thing where souls and metal are seen as the same thing in the cognitive realm. I think that it's possible that on different planets, there is a different connection for just the base human. Like on Nalthis, where everyone has a breath, I would also suspect that there's like, you're already a little invested. So you're just base human.
Little.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
Exactly. I'm not saying that they are cognitive shadows, if we want to use that phrase specifically to talk about something like Kelsier, or like Eshonai, or a Herald, or an Awakener, or excuse me, a Returned. I think that just the base thing that all entities across the Cosmere have is like a soul, and we know that that is connected through the cognitive, spiritual, and physical realms. And that can be different on different planets. That's all I'm saying, is that like we don't know what that level of balance is on different planets with the...
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I just think that it is the same.
This is interesting too, because going backwards in the journal just a little bit, Kalak says, quote, Midius once told me that we could use investiture to enhance our minds, our memories, so we wouldn't forget so much, end quote. And I think this is a direct tie-in, lead up, foreshadowing about what we see in the epilogue with
Yes.
Hoid and
Agree.
his memory manipulation at the hands of Terravodium.
Yeah. And we also know that Vasher knows something about this
Memories.
and uses this, which we see in Warbreaker, a fact that I did not
You never catch like the first
recognize until this last reread, which was like the third or fourth time I read Warbreaker.
That I think is another important piece of this puzzle, which is the Hoid bit and the question of like, what is he? How close to a herald is Hoid? How close to a returned is Hoid?
Yeah.
How-
What is Hoid exactly is
Yeah.
a great question.
Is Hoid more like a Spren, or is he more like a type 2 invested entity? Or is he another thing entirely?
Yeah, I mean, I
because he's
think-
just held a Dawn Shard.
Yeah,
but,
he's like a combination of things. He's like a cognitive shadow sliver spren human.
The only question I have is I don't think that Hoid has died. I could be wrong about this. But like the key aspect of a returned is that you died and then returned.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily see the heralds experience that, but I feel like it did happen to them. And that's kind of like the same process.
Like a big question. I'm interested in, again, like learning more about how exactly the heralds came to be heralds. I think that's a big question.
And so if Hoid has never died, then I actually don't think that he is comparable to a Kelsier or returned or herald.
But I think like similar to a being like that, Hoid is a soul that is so heavily invested that he could be something like them. You know, he's persisted for potentially millennia.
Yes, but has he, my query is, does he do that by some type of life extension, non-aging, a la the Lord Ruler? Some type of
because
trick like
he
that?
has so much investiture. He has probably thousands of breaths. He's collected like every investiture from every planet. That's a lot of investiture in one soul.
But I think originally he didn't have all of those things.
Right.
And there had to be some point when he figured out a way to extend his life. He either did that by, we'll say just generally, going the returned route, dying and then returning back. And then, yes, then you're saying it's just about like maintaining your investiture. But I think there's also the possibility that if he picked up a Dawn Shard during his regular life, that might have given him some knowledge about, you know, just normally extending his life. Not normally, but also not like the way that we're talking about with heralds.
I mean, or just like by virtue of being a Dawn Shard, you automatically get either longer life or like infinite life.
I could see discovery of a method to extend his life, a little like investiture loophole that he is basically just like tapping into it and it's helping, you know, fountain of youth, a la type of thing. But I think that would be better for Hoid, basically. The less separations there are between what you were, you know, at birth, the better. I think the heralds are in a worse place. I think Vasher is either at the same place they are or like going to be in the same place that they are.
Oh, I mean, Vasher seems like he's doing a lot better.
Because he's so young, I think. Because he's so young and because he hasn't been like tortured for thousands of years.
Fair enough.
But like, I think that
the absence of thousands of years of torture will go a long way.
It can help. He's been sad for a lot of those years, but like not actively being
not
tortured.
That he didn't have bad things happen to him, but yeah, there's a line.
And so I think that Vasher is on the same timeline as the heralds, but he's just earlier. You know, he's looking at the heralds as like, that is what I can become. I don't know if anyone is looking at Hoid and being like, oh yeah, I could become that.
Well, yeah, everyone's looking at Hoid thinking WTF.
And I think that like we have 3 examples, Kelsier being the newest, Vasher being our middle point, and the heralds being the end point of like, this is the danger of whatever, seeking to the path of the returned. Just like infinite returned is not good in the Cosmere, in my perspective.
I think that's a good like philosophical take. But I still agree with our previous selves on another episode of this pod in that there is potentially some relevance to the way in which it's done, where like maybe the way that endowment is doing it is better for some reason than whatever Honor did to make the heralds. Like, Honor, dude, seems like you didn't do a great job on that one. Always throw out the first pancake.
I like the idea of herald pancakes. I think that there were some experimentations, like, for example, the bondsmiths existed for a long time before the humans showed up, and there could have been more like relationships with their, we'll call them like their Uber spren, their pet spren, their sprenvatars, but like the Night Watcher for cultivation, that kind of seems like a, not herald, obviously, but it's something. They're playing around with some type of power, giving some of themselves and their power to this thing that probably
to try to create something outside of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was probably some, experimentation levels going on, and the heralds were then like, oh, we need to activate this power because we're in the middle of a war. Let's slapdash together all of our projects and turn it into one gigantic Frankenstein, and we'll call it the 10 Heralds. I don't feel good for the heralds. I'm very, very sorry for all of you.
Agree.
But the concept that Kalak introduces about that bond keeping them alive, I think is really important because of the next thing that he says. Could you read this for us?
Oh, man. Yeah, he goes on to just a bunch of fascinating things. Quote, I know the truth of the Radiance, the Recreants, and the Nahel Spren. End quote. What is the truth? What?
Need to know.
Yeah.
Need to know right now.
I just immediately stopped and I'm like, I want to know the truth about the Radiance. What is the truth about the Recreants? What in the world is the truth about the Nahel Spren? What? Tell me the truth.
Now, see, I connect it directly with what he was talking about being bonded to each other, like the heralds being bonded to each other, with some truth about the Nahel Spren, the ones that bond the humans, like bonding, that means something bad. Like that's my feeling, is like the heralds have a bad deal here with all of the bonding together.
Yeah, but that's because the heralds are bonded to other humans, these fallible other humans. Like, maybe that's the point of the Nahel bond with Spren, is that they are bonding to a Spren in order to be held to a higher standard, so that there's like a non-human being there to hold them to their ideals and things like that. We know that, we've heard rumblings, and we hear a lot of rumblings about this in Rhythm of War. The fact that on Ashen, they didn't have these same parameters, and it's mentioned a lot in particular around the bondsmiths because they're so powerful. But I think it's true of any magic user, whom they still refer to as a surge binder, but not in the same way as they are now. So magic users on Ashen had powers, but they were not restricted in the same way they became once they came to Rashar and were like sort of reined in first by Honor. And so like, I wonder if that has something to do with the way that the heralds were created and constructed. If Honor was like, okay, I get it, you need these great powers, but I still want there to be like a check on you. So I'm going to bind you all together so that you have like someone to be responsible for and someone to answer to.
And then the Spren either saw that and copied it, or they were first and Honor took that as his inspiration. I don't know what the chicken or the egg is, but
I think they're related.
Each other.
Yeah, and Honor was like, okay, here's the way we can do this. Like, I'll give you these higher Spren they'll give you powers, like, so you can have the powers, but you're still going to have this check.
What I am worried about is that there will be a kind of either loophole or chain reaction type of event where the bondsmiths are great, they're super powerful, and everyone is like tapping into the bondsmiths to fuel their surge binding, and so more and more connections are being formed between all of them. And then if you start taking out, you know, your main sources of power, the ramifications and like the blowback can be very dangerous. That's what I'm worried about. Is like the bond is your strength, as you are pointing out, but it is also an inherent weakness, as the heralds are examples of. Like if one herald could have just held on and held back for 4,000 years, but he wasn't connected to the other ones, and the other ones might not have been tortured, or they might not have been, you know, magically maladied. They may have just been able to go live normal lives, but because of the bond, all their weaknesses impacted all of them collectively. If one broke, they all break. It's just kind of like you tap over the dominoes, and if the dominoes are all connected, they're all going to fall.
Yeah.
And so I'm worried. I'm worried about the secret that Kalak seems to know. But then he says some things that are right up our alley for Shallan, and it seems like their paths were entangled and will continue to remain entangled going forward, because his plea really at the end of his journal is seemingly also exactly what Shallan is interested in and wants to solve for her story going forward.
Quote, "You must release the captive unmade. She will not fade as I will. If you leave her as she is, she will remain imprisoned for eternity. Please find Mishram and release her. Not just for her own good, for the good of all Spren. For I believe that in confining her, we have caused a greater wound to Rashar than any ever realized." End quote.
And that's how he ends it? It's just like, what?
So many things in those last, like, 3 sentences.
So, Ba'edo Mishram, stuck inside of a powerful gemstone, tried to lead the false desolation. When Ba'edo Mishram was captured, it severs the connection to the singers, and they become the Parshmen. Okay. So
but
that's a clear wound.
And it also seems to have something to do with the recreants of the Spren and Knights Radiant being like, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to break our bonds for some reason.
Yeah, but then
because we think that this will be better. Yeah, exactly.
To me, it seems like there are a couple of similarities. One, we just saw in Oathbringer, Dalinar capture the Thrill. And that is comparable, or we think it's comparable as one of the Unmade to Ba'edo Mishram. So, like, do we have to release the Thrill too? It would seem so. If one is good to be captured, the other one shouldn't be.
Well, I still have so many questions about the Unmade, because we know that there are some Unmade that are more cognizant and more awake, more human-like, like Ba'edo Mishram and Ja-Anat. And there are some Unmade that are more
like
mindless, right? So it's almost like a higher Spren and lower Spren dichotomy, where you have like Wind Spren and then you have Honor Spren. So it is very interesting, because Kalak is kind of echoing everything that the sibling is saying.
Very similar to the sibling.
In Rhythm of War, like, you know, we can't keep this aware being trapped inside of a gemstone forever. It's not right.
And it's not just for her own good. It's also for the good of all Spren.
Right. Like, what?
Why is it for the good of all Spren?
Why is it for the good of all Spren?
And I have to think
what
that it has to do something
change?
with connection. Like I have so many just crazy theories that come out of these couple of sentences, but like, what is the wound that was caused to Rashar?
Yes.
Obviously, the singers becoming Parshmen. That's a wound. That's bad. But he's saying it from the perspective of Spren as well. So it's like, okay, you lost the ability to connect the singers to the Spren that used to help them change forms. right?
Yeah.
And without that connection, they become Parshmen. I think that there's got to be something with the way that all life works on Rashar that was like broken.
But it seems like that would have had to have been broken before, because Ba'ato Mishram is not like the OG thing that gives singers their forms. She's the hack that they start using.
But then the hack is, as we've talked about before, almost reflected back. It's like the thing you can identify. Ba'ato Mishram is now using the power of the singers. And then you just reverse attack that piece directly, and it like creates a cascading effect of weakening whatever used to exist for the singers. But like they took on the power because they wanted the hack. They wanted to have a desolation led by Ba'ato Mishram. And then that got turned and reversed on them. But like, I think it applies to all Spren. I think it applies to everything. I think there's some reason. Okay, so here is my craziest theory, but it's connected to all of these things. If, as you said, some of the unmade are like forces, and some of them are more, higher Spren, whatever you want to label them, but they're like slightly more cognizant and sapient.
Yeah.
What if they were all forces and the made part of the unmade is the tests that we were just talking about with the creation of the heralds? Is like, think of what the Night Watcher is to cultivation. We already talked about it. It's like this little entity that you kind of grew and shared power with. What if there were other things on Rashar, like the forces of the thrill, and then they started playing with those and started to try and like, let's bring them together like gravity. Let's try to pull this stuff all together, and it starts to become like one thing. And then because it's collecting on Rashar, it's going to develop in the cognitive realm as well. And so you're going to get all this like swirling power that becomes, over enough time, if you have enough coalescing, it becomes a made, one of these forces. It becomes Ba'ato Mishram over enough time, because you've like solidified an aspect of power or force that was there on Rashar. And so now all of these made creatures then get twisted by odium. They become the unmade, as we have speculated before. And now they are like twisted versions of themselves. But what if they were like forces on Rashar that do exist and are necessary? And so like by severing Ba'ato Mishram, you like broke something on Rashar, in the same way that in Elantris, you break the geography and you break the magic system. What if breaking Ba'ato Mishram is like fundamentally snapping something off of its axle for Rashar?
Yeah, I get that.
It's a crazy theory, but I'm just like so interested. Like, why would Kalak care so much about? It's the last thing that he wants anyone to know. Everything else was just kind of like blah, 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 blah. Pause. Do this thing. It's really, really important.
Yeah, especially because he was party to
Her
entrapping
capture.
her.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it does just make you wonder, when clearly Ba'ato Mishram was an opponent that they felt so strongly like needed to be defeated and taken out of the equation, that they, figured out this whole way to trap her. And so it's just like, what happened that's so important that like you want to release the opponent that you worked so hard to entrap?
I think it could have something to do with the unite them that Dalinar hears as well. First, he thinks it's about, the orders of the Knights Radiant, and he needs to bring them and
First, he thinks it's about the High Princes.
Then he thinks it's about the orders of the Knights Radiant.
Yeah.
What if it's about the species on Rashar? Not just the humans and the singers, but also the Spren. What if they're all supposed to be united?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a definite possibility that Dalinar's Unite Them just continues to scale up.
Yeah, just every single time you have any option, it's just unite them. Unite them.
Yeah,
unite
it
them.
just goes to like the singers and the humans, and then all of the
Rosharians.
the physical realm and the cognitive realm, and then it goes Cosmere wide, and it's like unite the entire Cosmere, and then it's like unite all of the shards back together.
That could be the route that it goes, but I certainly see it playing out so far that way. Like, he seems to be scaling up. I could see what Kalak is saying is like, no, we misjudged this. This was a bad call because it made us lose something that was important. Clearly, the singers had a important relationship with Spren that was severed. Maybe, and the humans we know can have clear, strong relationships with Spren as well, even to the point of bonding. I'm thinking in my crazy head, and for those who've seen Legend of Korra, this is kind of like what happens in the later seasons, but like the spirit world, the cognitive realm, and the physical world need to start harmonizing a little bit better.
That is 100% like the image that comes to my mind when I read those sentences also, is just like, did the Spren used to like be on physical Roshar, live in their little Spren lives, and then now they've been like shoved into the cognitive realm, and like, is that what is gonna change? I don't know. And then we'll just have like the spirit world coming into the physical world.
Yeah, just, I mean, the big portals open all the time, and you can just like casually move in between the cognitive and physical realm. I think that would be very cool, and also very significant to make Roshar like the way stop of the Cosmere. Is like, maybe everyone has to travel to Roshar because of, some cognitive travel laws of physics that we don't know.
Oh, yes.
But I'm just saying, like, maybe it becomes that Roshar is like the middle point for people traveling, because you have to go into the cognitive realm, and the place you can get out of the cognitive realm is Roshar, and you can like refuel there, travel to a different portal, and then
you
take
can
off to the
do
rest
that
of
if
the
you're
Cosmere.
using a shard pool.
So far, but I'm talking way far in the future if there's like a full Cosmere economy that's like got highways and stuff going through. I'm imagining
okay,
a wondrous Cosmere that will be here in the future someday.
I found a really interesting word of Brandon that is sort of tangentially related to all of this that I would love to read if you don't mind.
Why would I mind? This is exactly what we're here for.
So Brandon recently did a Q&A with another Cosmere podcast, and one of them asked about the gemstone holding the thrill that they toss into the ocean. And this is what Brandon had to say. Quote, "They, at Yasna's suggestion, which came through Hoyd, locked it in an aluminum box and threw it in the ocean. The argument for this being that anywhere they could hide it, the enemy could get to it, and an unmade would be pretty easy to find in the cognitive realm. You can't hide an unmade anywhere very easily. Aluminum's going to help a ton with doing that. So what you have to do is try to make it as inaccessible as possible. And the most inaccessible thing they could do was lock it in an aluminum box and throw it in the ocean. If they had kept it anywhere in the city or whatnot, then the enemy would have been able to find it very easily, even inside of an aluminum box. This method was their best guess at being able to keep it out of the enemy's hands. It's not a great solution, unfortunately. There just isn't one that they could find. As we talk about a certain other unmade who is somewhere locked in a gemstone that might come up in the next book, maybe." End quote.
So who's the other unmade that's trapped in a gemstone? That's Ba-Ido Mishram.
Yes.
A question about this, though, is like, wait, if I really did want to get back the thrill, would it be easier to get it in the cognitive realm?
Yeah, definitely.
Because the ocean would become land?
Yeah.
And it would just be like a mountain instead of really, really deep?
I think so. Yeah.
So we're going mountaineering in the cognitive realm in the next book. That's like, first it was just like, almost like it had like a tropical vibe, the images of the cognitive realm done on the cover of Rhythm of War.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I'm saying we're going north next time, and they're going to be parka-ing up.
Climbing some mountains.
Exactly. Looking for that thrill. I don't know why anyone would need the thrill. It doesn't seem that helpful, but I do think the similarity between Ba-Ido Mishram being captured in the past, Kalak saying that was a bad idea, and Dalinar having captured the thrill, is he eventually going to come to the same conclusion? Like, dang it, we need that
Well,
for XYZ.
and I think this is just a great clue to finding the gemstone with Ba'ara Mishram, because you would think that the humans in the past would have kind of had the same thought process of like, what are we going to do with this gemstone now? We need to hide it, but like we have all of these same problems of being inaccessible and being able to find it in the cognitive realm, blah, blah, blah. So like, they probably came up with some similar solution.
So we are going mountaineering in the cognitive realm.
Yes, book our next vacation.
Excellent. It's going to be dope. Think like Switzerland, but cognitive realm Switzerland.
I imagine that this is a conversation that Adolin and Shalon either have had or will have. Yeah, they're just like, on our next vacation to the cognitive realm, what should we do, darling?
They've gone a couple of times now. Their frequent flyer miles are really stacking up. If you
they really need like a frequent Mandra pass or something so that they just can always get passage on a ship.
Really, the gamification, the Disneyfying of the cognitive realm economy, it's coming. Soon you will all have little Mickey Mouse
much
tickets.
To the chagrin of the Reacher Spren.
Any final thoughts about Kalak, Cognitive Shadows?
We do have a Stormlight Archive explained badly.
Okay, from Randy Tang. Hit me with it.
Bunch of dudes got chosen to save the world, but LOL, mental disorders.
It happens. It happens occasionally. I think that this epigraph and the mysteries that Kalak has introduced are going to be one that we are constantly returning to.
Yeah, I think we're going to come back to this a lot.
And just as you are going through part 4, it is tough to keep these epigraphs in mind, but you got to do it. Or you got to come back and listen to this.
Or you got to come back, yeah. Next, we are going to tackle the final epigraphs from that creepy old L. And we'll talk about his Katek as well.
As always, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. We have a Patreon that you can become a patron on. We are also on YouTube, where there's a lot of great playlists that you can just turn on the YouTubes and listen to at your heart's content. Until next time.
Life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.